These are my full card predictions for UFC Fight Night Whittaker vs Aliskerov. I will be covering every fight on the card, starting with the first prelim fight and working my way up to the main event itself. There will be timestamps in the description and comments if you are looking for any fight in particular. Without delaying any further, the first fight of the card is Xiao Long versus Chang Ho Lee. I'm going to go with Xiao Long to win this fight. I think Chang Ho Lee is honestly worse at grappling than people think. Just purely on the fact that when I see him shoot, it's like Dustin Poirier's dream situation because he tends to chuck his head right into prime guillotine position every time, and he doesn't really seem to have any other takedown to rely on. I think Xiao has the better stand-up game as well. I think he has more power in his hands, and I believe that he'll be able to stuff Chang Ho Lee's takedown attempts and be able to out-damage him and out-point him on the feet to win a decision. I'm just hoping that Xiao Long doesn't slow down too much in the third and continues putting a good pace on him, and if he's able to achieve that, I think he wins this fight. We move on. Magomed Gadzhiyasulov versus Brendson Ribeiro. I'm going to go with Magomed Gadzhiyasulov. This fight's really ending in the first round, I'll be honest. I say that because if Brendson fights how he normally fights and isn't more tentative after being knocked out by Chang in his last fight, he goes to sleep in the first round, almost guaranteed. Gadzhiyasulov is just way more technical all around, and he also has bombs in his hands and fires a lot in the first two. And if he decides to grapple him the whole fight, I can see him having great success in that avenue as well. Listen, when I know a slugfest or a firefight is always coming up, I always side with the fighter that looks more technical because he's always able to navigate the fight and pick his shots better. Not saying there's no chance that Brendson wins, just saying that the majority of the time, I think Gadzhiyasulov gets this done. First round finish by Gadzhiyasulov. We move on. Kang versus Muin Gafurov. I'm going to go with Muin Gafurov in this fight. The reality of this fight is that it's pretty much a 50-50, super close for sure. My reasoning for leaning towards Gafurov is his willingness to exchange and throw shots, powerful shots, and his overall finishing potential on the feet is a lot higher than Kang's, I believe. I think I can see Gafurov edging out a decision on the feet, especially if he's able to stay away from the ground game of Kang. I could also see him finishing him towards the second round if he's able to put in some solid, controlled pressure on Kang in the stand-up. One of my worries in this bout is that Muin Gafurov can be pretty reckless at times as he's trying to entry, and someone like Kang can be pretty slick on the feet at times and can counter you if you're leaving yourself open too much. That's the other possibility I see in this match, so that is why it's sort of like a 50-50 for me. But I believe Gafurov will be my pick, and that is what I'll be sticking with in this bout. Hope he can get this one done. We move on. Rinat Fakhretdinov versus Nicolas Dalby. I'm going to go with Rinat Fakhretdinov to get this one done. Dalby would be a great underdog pick though, because he's got a great gas tank, and his pace is pretty good, and he's pretty solid on the feet. But I just don't think Dalby will be able to handle someone like Rinat Fakhretdinov on the feet, just because of his power advantage. He's got a great pace himself. I think he's got a grappling advantage in this fight, and he definitely has the power advantage on the feet. I also think Dalby just gets hit way too much. Some shots he just ends up eating like a punching bag a bit, which I don't like against a guy who could shut your lights out almost certainly in this fight. I'm calling a finish for Rinat Fakhretdinov for sure, and I think he could knock him out or finish him on the ground. He's next level, and I believe he's going to show that in this fight. We move on. Muhammed Naimov versus Felipe Lima. I'm actually going to go with Muhammed Naimov in this fight, and I'll explain why. I looked through Felipe's fight history, since I always look up every fighter's fight history, and I watched back his fight tape before I say anything. He's actually quite a solid fighter, but he had a bout scheduled for a literal month from now, and it was a bantamweight fight. This is important to note since Felipe Lima is actually a bantamweight fighter. He's not super big for the division either, and he's making his UFC debut upper weight class in featherweight on short notice, and he was already scheduled to fight a month from now in another bout, but cancelled that and has been called to fight in the UFC. Muhammed Naimov will be the bigger guy. He's definitely got KO power since he was able to put down Jamie Malarkey in their fight, and he's fought and has been fighting in the UFC in a weight class that he's already accustomed to. It just seems like there's too much stacked against Felipe Lima in this fight. I really hate picking fighters on short notice regularly as well. If Felipe Lima manages to do anything in this fight, we've definitely got someone that's worth talking about entering the UFC right now. Muhammed Naimov gets this one done. We move on. Nasrat Haqparast versus Jared Gordon. I'm going to go with Nasrat Haqparast here. For some reason, I can just see Nasrat chinning him in this fight and putting him to sleep. This is more of a pure gut pick, and I know that Nasrat is a moderate favorite in this fight too, but I do think that it should be closer on the odds than what it is right now. We need to not forget that Jared Gordon literally pieced up and beat Paddy Pimblett on the feet before getting robbed, and then he was piecing up Bobby Green a little bit to an extent before getting headbutt and sent into the Shadow Realm via KO, which was turning into a no contest in the end anyway. But to continue, I'm just saying saying that I think the fight odds should be closer than what they are. And at the end of the day, I'm still picking Nasrat Haqparast by finish since he's very dangerous on the feet and I can just see him catching him in this fight. So we move on. On to the main card, Johnny Walker versus Volkan Oezdemir. I'm thinking Johnny Walker is going to finish Volkan Oezdemir in the early rounds of this fight. All I'm going to say is that Johnny Walker has been a lot more technically sound in the past few years and he's improved quite a bit, even with his losses to Ankalaev and Jamal Hill. I also believe that Volkan Oezdemir, while he can be dangerous on the feet, will be slower and less explosive than Johnny Walker. He also tends to lead with his chin when closing the distance, meaning he doesn't tuck his chin in the slightest, which is something I never like to see from a fighter because it just makes me think they're going to get slept by a knee or an uppercut through the middle. Because what fighter throws jumping switch knees up the middle when someone's closing the distance? It's Johnny Walker. If I did, however, need to see a way for Oezdemir to win this fight, it would definitely be to be more proactive in his grappling and feint on Johnny Walker to try to draw something out and be able to shoot on him pretty safely. But I don't see this fight planning out this way. I think Johnny will be too much for Oezdemir to handle in the early going of this fight. I'm locking in Johnny Walker by finishing the early rounds. We move on. Shara Magomedov versus Antonio Trocoli. I'm going to go with Shara Magomedov to win this fight no matter who he's versing in this card when everyone's pulling out. Shara was meant to verse Ihor Peteria, then he pulls out, and then he was set to verse Jolton Luderbach. Then, as I'm getting ready to record my video, Jolton Luderbach pulls out due to them finding a banned substance in his urine, like he's shocked there's something there, man. Like, come on, seriously. I'll be honest, guys, I did all the research and I wrote this script already for this fight, and now I have to throw it all out. I've already done the research on Antonio Trocoli since he was meant to fight Ikram Aliskerov in the last fight card, UFC Fight Night Perez vs. Tyra. But Aliskerov was taken out of that fight to fight Whittaker on this freaking card. Like I said, I'm still going with Shara Magomedov, so I don't really care. I don't think Antonio Trocoli is UFC level, and he hasn't versed anyone who is UFC level yet either. That's my pick, and we move on. Kelvin Gastelum versus Daniel D-Rod Rodriguez. I'm going to go with Kelvin to get this one done by decision or finish in the later rounds. I've been saying it for a long time since before the Li Jingliang robbery that Daniel Rodriguez got gifted. I think Daniel Rodriguez is overrated in the stand-up, and I think Kelvin Gastelum, although he had a bad performance against Sean Brady in his last fight, which was mostly a grappling match anyway, he looked great on the feet in his bout with Chris Curtis, and I think I favor him in a technical striking match against Rodriguez, and a brawling striking match as well, since his chin's most likely better than D-Rod's too. Also, if anyone is going to change levels in this fight, or decide to make this a grappling contest on the ground, it would be Kelvin Gastelum, and I think it would be a smart move too, just to keep him guessing and mix in some takedowns in this fight. I just think he'll be able to shut down D-Rod's game pretty badly in this fight, especially since it's only 3 rounds too, which makes me worry less about anything affecting Kelvin's cardio. Kelvin's the more active fighter, he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think Kelvin Gastelum most likely gets this one done. We move on. Sergei Pavlovich versus Alexander Volkov. I'm going to go with Sergei Pavlovich first round KO. It's my pick, and I've said it, but man, I could really see Volkov outstriking him and finishing him in the later rounds, you know? One of the only things deterring me from actually picking Volkov is the reach advantage in this fight. If Sergei's reach was similar to like Tai Tuivasa's, I think I'd be picking the underdog pick of Volkov right now. But with Sergei having the reach advantage, it's just hard to see Volkov piecing up Sergei from the outside in this fight, since he can't rely on speedy footwork like someone like Tom Aspinall can rely on. Not to say that Volkov doesn't have good footwork, because he does, but I just don't think it compares to Tom Aspinall's, and I think that's what he would need to avoid a bomb from Pavlovich as he starts to walk Volkov down early in the first round. My only true concern is if you go back and watch a lot of Pavlovich's fights, he doesn't necessarily get rocked or hurt, but he does take a decent amount of punches solid on the chin as he's entering or hunting down his opponent. Just a little food for thought, and I thought it'd be important to know for you guys making your decisions on this fight. Sergei Pavlovich is my pick though. We move on. Now on to the main event, Robert Whittaker versus Ikram Aliskerov. Quick one, guys, and I'm going to be straight up here. I'm going to go with Robert Whittaker to get the win here and potentially finish Ikram Aliskerov. I'm going to say it right now as well, that I was originally thinking of going with Robert Whittaker to beat Khamzat Chimaev, and I was thinking he'd be able to survive the first round, and then Whittaker would take over since Khamzat can't seem to keep some sort of pace past the first round, and a 5-round fight would be extremely difficult for him against someone like Whittaker. The same applies here in this scenario with Ikram, who really is a worse Khamzat Chimaev in this scenario. He doesn't seem to rush in and try to destroy his opponents in the first round like Khamzat does, which I think will work against him, since staying at range with Whittaker for extended periods of time is not good if you like to actually beat him, since his stand-up is so good. Ikram does have some solid jabs though, and if he's able to utilize his offensive grappling advantage by shooting for takedowns, clinching, and trying to actively go for throws and trips, I could see him having some really good success in this fight. But I just think Whittaker's too smart, man. I think he'd should know he has an overwhelming striking advantage and he'd be working on his takedown defense, his defensive grappling, and his submission defense. I think he's going to be too sharp, too technical, and just too much for Aliskerov to handle at this point in his career. Ikram hasn't even versed a ranked middleweight yet, and now he's versing potentially one of the greatest middleweights in UFC history. Like, look at Robert Whittaker's career overall. I'll also be crying myself to sleep as well if Whittaker gets chinned in this fight, so he better win just for the sake of my sanity. To set the pick in stone, I'm going to go with Whittaker by decision or later rounds TKO as my final prediction. And that'll be it for my prediction video, guys. Let me know if you agreed or disagreed in the comments below. Thanks for watching again, and see you guys next time.